All right, welcome to Evidence-Based Audio number 174. And really, I was supposed to move this over to the new channel. I guess I screwed that up. I'll do that next week. Sorry. This is going to be entitled, Is FRFR Really the Goal? And oh boy, is this distracting. Let me turn this junk off here. That's not so bad. Okay. Well, first of all, Reaper 6.63 is out, and I'm sure if you go over to John Tidy's place, he probably explains the whole thing. Batch converter fixed issues with audio units that use PDC, so delay compensation. That's kind of important. Render document marker number wildcard. It has been supported for a long time, but not documented. Okay, so marker number is one of the wildcards that you can use in the render names. There's some weird stuff about that actually later. We got to check into that. Spectral edits, add mouse modifier to create new edits. Nice. So you can really go in there and chop things up. Let's see what else. Avoid creating file names that start with a space character. Man, they really dug deep on some of these things. Let's see. Fix sample accurate parameter changes with Bridge VST3 plugins. Round 2 VST, time info, sample position and nearest sample. Add support for rendering between project markers. Nice. Improve speed of offline render with muted unsoloed tracks. Nice. Save, restore tail length with render presets. Interesting. Some razor edits. Fix trim action when multiple razor edits exist on the same media item or automation item. Fix editing when partial measures exist in project. I gotta be honest. I still don't use the razor edit stuff. I don't even really understand it. I need to go watch some videos or something on it because that one went right by me. It looked incredible when they were unveiling it, and I wonder if it's anything that I actually need though. So I'll take a look at that. Looks like there's some Linux fixes as well. So reverb, add text to indicate which file to browse for when deconvolving on Mac OS. Okay, so I guess if you were making your own impulses, you may not have been able to pick the test file. Okay, let's go on here. So I don't know where I've been. You know, I really got my start as a guitar tech, and it's interesting, this Liberator potentiometer from Seymour Duncan. I always love this kind of stuff that you stick inside the guitars. It's always what I wanted to do, but I ended up not doing that stuff. I still do fix guitars a lot. Sometimes I'll even do it on the stream, but it's really just for me or for the kids around here and stuff. But this is the Liberator potentiometer pickup swapping system that enables you to change pickups without a soldering iron. Replaces a standard 250K volume pot. So really what I guess you do is you it's got these little screw terminals, and you stick the 4-wire pickups or whatever, you stick them into there and just screw them in. You're probably better off tinning the ends first, but you don't have to solder them in, which I think is the point. And they may actually come pre-tinned for all I know. I can't even remember. So I seen a bunch of people complaining about this, but and I don't know how handy it really is. Just pull out a couple wires, but it looks cool. You've got a choice of 250 or 500K. So let's see what else. It's you simply insert the bare end of each pickup lead into one of the Liberator's pickup connector stations and tighten the screw clamp to lock it down. Turning the screw lifts up a carriage and locks the wire against a fixed pad, securing the connection in one place. Now, is this This is a 250K version, can be used with single coils or HSS hum single setups. So what exactly? There's a bunch of terminals on here. How many? Is there like a 4-wire option and 2-wire options or something? Let's look at the wiring here. Content will be updated soon. Great. I'd like to see the wiring for this thing. Then I'd have a better idea of exactly how it works. Because, you know, you're talking about pulling in one pickup. And so this is going to go out to the switches or whatever. But, you know, you probably have more pickups than one. So I'd like to see the wiring. If anybody out there has actually seen this thing, let me know. Okay. There's another thing from Seymour Duncan, and this is really the kind of stuff that I really wish I would have had back in the day. This is cool. The triple shot mounting ring. So if you're using passive pickups, like a 4-wire pickup, allegedly, you solder your pickup, I guess, to the rings of this thing, and then, or to a little ribbon cable that goes to the ring on this thing, and then you press buttons and or hit switches, and you can switch between wiring options. So here's, let me read what this is. Wiring mods made easy with 4 different sounds at the tips of your fingers. This is the flat Trembucker size ring in black. So we got an arched one, flat one, a set of them, neck bridge, or a bridge. And they can get them in black or cream. It says the triple shot mounting ring is amazing for a variety of reasons. You got tons of tonal variety from the 4 different sounds it gives you, splitting to either coil, series operation, and parallel operation. You're able to easily switch between the various sounds with just the flip of your finger. No more reaching for push pulls. There are 2 small slider switches at the low E string edge of the ring for easy access. And the triple shot is incredibly easy to hook up. No more fumbling with push-pull or mini toggle connections. Actually, I don't mind fumbling with those, but to have them right there on the pickup ring, that's nice. Especially for stuff that you're really not going to change too much, you know. I mean, I guess you could, but I hate giving up on options. So, you know, something like this leaves you with all the options you want sitting there. That's really like, but here, let's see. The triple shots, color-coded labels, solder pads, or snaps to set up. Imagine having coil splits on your 335 without having to pull the harness and struggle to get the pots back in the right place. 1 ring for each pickups means 4 sounds per humbucker. The combinations are almost endless. Let's see. Now, is there wiring diagrams? Yeah, you know, I had a lot of trouble finding even how to hook up the quick connect terminals for the blackout pickups. You know, I really have trouble getting the wiring info I want. I like that they have these wiring diagrams, but really be nice to have like a manual on the pickup page or whatever. Let's see if it's on other guitar wiring. Let's just say 2 pickups real quick. All right, no, not blackouts. This is something with the 4 wires. Okay. Let's do 1. Okay, so I'm looking for this thing. See, so I don't know where this where this 3-wire terminal thingy is. Like, I'd like to get a picture of what it really looks like. Let me see if I can find it. Triple shot wiring. Images. Here we go. Oh, God, that's small. Where's this coming from? This has the picture of oh, here we go. the Seymour Duncan one. Okay, so it looks like it has the 4 positions on each one to solder into, and so your 4 wires go into the 4 terminals. The way it looks on the page, it looks like there's only 3 terminals, but whatever. So this is looking pretty cool. All right, let me see what the next thing is here. I had a couple. And of course, I'm going to get into some forum crankiness as usual. Sorry about that, but that's just how it is. Okay. Oh, so we're going to be talking about maybe moving away from the FRFR system. But one thing about, using guitars on stage, especially with these digital modeling systems, if you're using a modeler, you have speaker emulators on there. Ideally, if you're given a direct signal to the PA guy. So say you're playing a live show, and I detail this a lot on my webpage and the 2-path philosophy and all this stuff. But it's something, you hear it talked about a lot. If you're not going to mic up an amp, which really in this day and age, I'd rather you didn't. But if you're not going to mic up an amp, guitar players, how awful a guitar amp can sound without a speaker cabinet sound. It's just this horrible, scratchy, nasty thing. So we put a speaker cabinet or a speaker cabinet emulator on the way to the PA system, so the signal the PA system has sounds like it's going through a guitar speaker. But you may be monitoring yourself on stage with a guitar amp, which has a guitar speaker, so you don't want that on there. So you want to have a path that has that on there and a path that doesn't have that on there, ideally. You might always play with an FRFR on stage, in which case you'd be using the same sort of signal with the speaker cabinet on it. And in my case, I wanted to have, on my Helix anyway, the main XLR outputs go out to the PA system without any volume control on my end. Like my master volume control on the Helix wouldn't control it. Wouldn't mess up what's going to the PA system. I'd rather that's the sound man messing with that. And I had another output, my 1/4-inch output, actually going to an XLR too as an adapter. But in this case, is following the master volume on the Helix. Now I wanted a send out, and I'm going to pull up my Helix HX Edit. So I'm still having some bugs with the Helix. Maybe we'll talk about that, maybe not. But here's this send here. And I want to be able to turn this up or down on a big volume knob. And really, there's no way to do that easily. I could put it on a separate path on a 1/4-inch or whatever. If you look at, when I look at the outputs here, you could use as a path the 1/4-inch, the XLR, the send 1 and 2, and whatever. But it doesn't necessarily give you this as an option. I think it gives you multi, 1/4-inch, or XLR as the options on the actual outputs. Let me just confirm that real quick. And sorry that you can't see this from here, but global settings and where is it? Ins, outs. Is it ins and outs or is it preferences? Okay, the volume knob controls. I can choose between 1/4-inch, multi, 1/4-inch plus XLR, or 1/4-inch, XLR, digital. So there's no way for me to choose send 1 and 2. Otherwise, I could put it on a separate path out there and then just turn it. So thanks to somebody in the forums here. Let's see who that was. Alex Knievel, who's often a pretty good source of help for this kind of thing. The only knob that will work is the encoder knob under the send parameter. I always use send 1 for my power amp cab so I can see how useful a dedicated knob would be. Control with the expression pedal, a MIDI knob maybe. And somebody else said you could probably build a knob in a box that mimics an expression pedal and assign it to work to a volume block. Not bad. And then people are asking, why would you use that send? And, I know I get in a lot of fights on this forum, but there's often, and always extend the principle of charity. Assume that the person isn't trying to be insulting or trying to be an idiot, that they're just asking a genuine question. Always put it in the best light possible. Otherwise, you're just one of these offense hounds, always just looking to get offended. But people are just giving me, why would you even do that? Why would you even do that? You always see that crap. But when people don't understand, luckily, we were able to explain that. As I said, I have both the XLR outs and the 1/4 inch outs with an IR for speaker sim, where the XLR is bypassing the main volume knob going to front of house with the 1/4 inch, with the volume knob going to the full range flat response speaker, and the send one in case no FRFR is available to go right into any old guitar amp. And of course, that one with no speaker sim block. So, like they said, the solution was just save the patch with the send selected. And that way on the unit itself, sorry you can't see it, there'll be a soft knob right underneath this thing. This thing. Oops. Yeah, there's a knob right underneath it. And in this case, I saved it. I do have this really killer trainer amp, but the master volume is post effects return, and so I was like, oh, I got this thing is full blast all the time. But with this knob right here, this will actually be cool as long as I remember to save it all the way down here. So that's handy. Okay. So speaking of, I always seem to be getting in fights in this forum, but you know what? It's okay. It's stuff that needs to be said. Okay. So we saw this, we were talking about this last week, and it was with the guy Leo, whatever. He had a chart up of several amp modelers and their actual latency and stuff, and it's important to think about just how many times we've talked about latency purists and stuff on here, and it's funny that people have been playing through these modelers for forever, not complaining about the latency for the most part. And it's not actually that high. But you remember the iOS guitar stuff, the playing bias or amplitude or whatever through an iPhone. You're looking at like 20 milliseconds of round trip latency, if you're lucky. And people were okay with that. And now they're all absolutely crazy. I know there's lots of people that are very sensitive to latency. A lot of them aren't as sensitive as they think. They look at a certain number on the audio interface and assume that number is actually telling them the truth, where it usually isn't, and they're not really thinking about round trip latency and stuff. But there are people who are sensitive to this stuff, and there are times where latency absolutely matters, but it's sometimes it's conversely, in a way you don't expect. Let me just check this real quick. We're gonna see. Yeah, see, I had asked, somebody is saying, honest question, how many of the people in here who say it doesn't matter regularly play through headphones? The vast majority of my playing is through headphones for recording, and I can definitely tell the difference between 20 milliseconds, 15 milliseconds, and 5 milliseconds. Once it gets into the 6 to 7 millisecond range is when I can't reliably perceive the latency anymore. That makes sense. I'm not saying I can't adapt to any of the above. I'm just wondering if those who think nobody can hear this difference mainly plays through their speakers, monitors, cabs, where the room reflections and stuff make it a lot more difficult to separate the consistent gap due to latency from all the other sounds bouncing around the room. And we're actually going to talk a lot about this, especially with headphones. But I always say, I wonder how people with open-backed headphones can play with polycapo. Polycapo in the Helix is it's a pitch shifter, and it's meant to change your tuning, so like you've capoed your guitar, for instance, and so it's pitch shifting it. But when you play your guitar acoustically, you can actually hear your normal notes. And so you have to have your amp up pretty loud to where that won't bother you. And your brain is still recalibrating it anyway, which is a little bit weird. But the Swede answered, because we have already hearing damage from trying to drown out the guitar strings with headphone volume. Well, that's probably true. Anyway, this thing's talking about latency on this modeling gear, and after that what was it, Lao video, it really showed that, you know, even the finickiest people on the worst ones of these are usually doing okay. Let me get out of here. Let's just get into it. Okay. So we got a post here from the kid. Helix home recording stuff, Reaper fun, need help with vocals. And for those of you who don't know, the Helix is like a floor pedal digital modeler thing that Line 6 makes. I own one. I love it. Have some problems, do a lot of shows on it actually, but for the most part, I love this thing. It's also an audio interface. I don't really use it for that, although I do from time to time use some of its functions. You know, it's meant to, I mean, it's got a mic input and stuff on some of them. So it's meant to be your audio interface as much as any of like the old Line 6 tone ports were. I don't know if the drivers are the same. Some of those were really good drivers, as much as people hated them. But so let me read what's happening, and most of you guys are going to know what's going on here. So I've been working on a song. I have all the instrumentation done, and it's time to do the vocals. The issue I'm running into is that when I monitor things, even my guitars, but I know that I messed that up by feel, it's much quieter than the recorded tracks I'm playing along to. I feel like I have to crank the channel volume in Reaper to get a good recording mix, but then adjust it much lower to get a good playback mix. Second issue, I don't have this issue with either with guitar stuff, but the monitoring sound from my guitars is great. Vocals, once I do get the volume loud enough as mentioned in the above paragraph, it sounds very coarse and not very present. It doesn't sound muffled, it just sounds stiff and dry. The dry I get as I have not yet worked on any happy effects for that channel, but just trying to get my Helix preset for vocals in the channel set up so I can take some runs at singing, and I'm not happy with the results. Any help? I'm by far not a Reaper Power user, so I'm sure it could just be the settings related, no? Most of you guys have probably already guessed, and you know, this is a fight, and to me, it's not it has to be one or the other. You could use whichever one will work for you at that time. For the most part, I think most of the world, and man, if you answer as many tech support questions as I do all day long, and you know, and actually, you know, watch other people's recording sessions, talk to them, see what's going on in the world, talk to your customers. Most people are monitoring through the software at this point, for the most part. I mean, there's a lot of people, again, who are very sensitive to latency and are using some like, I'm going to put it in quotes, direct monitoring situations. Direct monitoring is not usually what people think, especially not now in the digital age. Anyway, this is the two-path thing. So he's hearing both the output from Reaper and he's hearing the input at the same time. But he's hearing them in two parallel paths. And what I always say is, for the most part, take that direct monitor switch, knob, whatever you got on your interface, and just turn it off. Just listen through the DAW. If you're okay with that latency, set it like that and rejoice and just be happy. And the reality is, most of the Sycon drivers, you're going to end up with around 13 milliseconds of latency at that sweet spot. That's you know, what is it, 128 buffer size? Let me see. Let me go to my latest. We'll go to the round trip latency roundup here at, you know, Kailua Music School. This is something I make, you know, with the help of everybody out there, of course. So 256. You know, look at these audiences. It's so funny. Like the ones that everybody's screaming are the greatest things in the world. They're pretty slow. Okay. Scarlett. Oh, I haven't put the third generation Scarlett on yet. I need to do that. But for the most part, somewhere around 13 milliseconds is going to be the round trip latency at 128 samples. It might be lower on some like this. The Audien ID4, so it's looking a little bit lower. Again, though, that's the Sycon driver. It's not an RME. Yeah, zoom's down there somewhere. So, 13 milliseconds I usually use as that point because that is the point where people are okay with it. And for the most part, I know, like I keep saying, and I hate disclaimers. I hate caveats. There are people who are more sensitive, but for the most part, there's a magic in that 13 millisecond number. That's where the computers get stable at 128 samples. Not so many plugins are really well suited to working underneath that 128. Like at 64, they really mostly start to fall. Maybe not anymore, but back in the day, that was really where things started to fall apart. So that 13 milliseconds is about where most people are actually recording. You hear about these people recording in their bedrooms through all their effects and stuff. That's them. They might be using that direct monitoring knob. That's what it's there for. But to me, that was for when computers were a lot less powerful and you couldn't get the latency down to this 13 milliseconds. I'd like it lower. If you look at mine right now, you can see that I'm running at 128, but that's on an RME, so I'm more like about 7 milliseconds. Could be lower. I could very realistically drop this audio interface down a lot and not worry about it. Your other alternative is, of course, to turn that direct monitoring on, and then you have to go every time you do a mix or a recording, you have to keep changing the levels in order to. You don't necessarily have to change them, but it is a problem. You're going to have two different mixers: the monitoring mixer and the playback mixer. It's kind of a pain, but if you're okay with that, back in the day when people were doing this on consoles and stuff, they were actually dealing with this a lot, and it was okay. So if you're okay with dealing with that and you want that super low latency, but let's really, for you guys that really understand this is the elephant in the room. There is no zero latency for what you guys are talking about. If you've played through a digital device, an amp model or whatever, it's never been zero latency. You've got converter latency at the bare minimum. At the bare minimum, your converter latency. So your whole zero latency thing is out the window. And these people scream bloody murder, like any latency at all, like murders kittens and kills puppies, Even your favorite one has latency. Your guitar thing has latency. Your direct monitoring, for the most part, I don't even know anymore. Is there one with a truly analog direct monitoring path? I don't know of one. There could be one, fine. But for the most part, your direct monitoring is through converters. Your ASIO DM, RME's crown jewel, is it's got converter latency, right? I don't know if it has any DSP latency, but it's definitely got converter latency. So KDM 1218, he sees the problem. I wouldn't go about it this way, but it's worth talking about. Have you turned on input monitoring for the track? It's a little speaker icon under the track name. Hover the mouse over it and it will tell you if it's on or off, but default is off. Well, you could do that, but you got to turn direct monitoring off on the Helix. So Alex Knievel, and we may not agree on this. So we're going to find out, actually. This is kind of a cliffhanger. Yeah. My first clickbait. When I'm recording in my DAW, I use Reaper. I keep all of my playback tracks peaking near minus 9 dB, so I don't need to worry about cranking up any recording volume. Regarding chorus sound, could be a few things, could be double monitoring. Yep. If you're monitoring from your hardware and software at the same time, you'll run into this issue. Yep. Mute the hardware playback to monitor with any VSC effects you want, incurring latency most of the time, or mute software monitoring and monitor via hardware minus any software effects. With the interesting exception, if you're doing a parallel effect like to a reverb and stuff, it'll probably still work just fine. There is the phasing phenomenon that occurs in your head when you're experiencing latency from your monitoring setup compared to the sound of your voice in your head. Flipping the phase may help here. But he's got three. He's got the sound coming out of his head. He's got the hardware playback time with its latency, and it's got the software playback time with its latency. So there's three going on there. Okay, so here's where the Dunning-Krugers will step in. And let me just... Sorry that I'm getting old and I need these glasses, but let me clean them up. I'm going to take a look at something. That's what happens when you don't get old, people. Okay, so I said, oh, here we go. Watch out for the voice of truth. That sounds so wrong. I say, usually just have Reaper do all the monitoring. No parallel monitor routing at all. So no direct sound whatsoever. All of it will be the monitor signal to Reaper. Then Nidon and the worrying about stuff. Text to speech got messed up. Then you don't have to worry about that stuff. Your monitor is your playback mix. Your monitor is your playback mix. So you only got one mix. And so here we go. Somebody says, I would not recommend this for vocals. Latency plus vocal monitoring equals bad for most signals. Much worse than it is for guitar. Okay. But that's a false dichotomy. No matter what, you've got latency. No matter if you got that direct monitor switch on or not, you've got latency. And there is actually a phenomenon. And this is in the peer-reviewed literature. This is the problem. This stuff is out there. You can actually go out there and just... And there might be some weird papers from the AES or whatever, but for the most part, they're good. But, you know, the literature on psychoacoustics it's in free journals, and it's pretty good. If it's low enough, you actually get some resonances that are louder than others. You know, for one thing, you got comb filtering, and that's going to happen at the super low latencies. So it can actually make more trouble to be extremely low. Like if you flip your polarity just one out, you got a big goose egg, right? So, and so I say, yet hundreds of thousands of albums have been recorded with a round trip latency of around 13 milliseconds. It's true. Even what's the Billie Eilish or whatever thing, like, you know, is she using the direct monitor on that Focusrite? I bet not. You know, so this, the same guy, my detractor says, a huge estimate followed by an oddly specific number. You guys all know what that 13 milliseconds is from, right? It's from the Psycon. It's from the USB drivers out there. That's the number they've got. And that's the number most people end up setting on, because that's the 128 buffers that keeps getting recommended in every one of these forums for the last 10 years. And you know, for all I know, you could come down to 64 now. But that 13 milliseconds is very specific because it's a very prolific number when it comes to audio drivers, because everybody's using the same damn driver for the most part. Having latency on the music playback is no problem, because you just sing in time with what you hear as it comes in. It doesn't matter if it has 60 seconds of latency from plugins, etc., because you have no way to perceive that since you're not the audio source. That's true. However, latency on the monitoring of your vocal audio is a likely way to spend extra time in pitch correction afterwards. 13 milliseconds is pretty awkward for singing if you've ever tried it. Now, I don't record as many albums as I used to. Nowhere near it. But I've recorded plenty enough to have this experience. And I know, like, the three scariest words you can hear from a doctor is in my experience. But it's not like I'm doing anything different here than anybody else. I understand this issue. And so I love the, if you've ever tried it. Listen, I've spent more time, almost guarantee I've spent more time in the studio than you've spent in a car. Okay? Again, however, latency on the monitoring your vocal audio. You've got latency. There's no way around it. So it's what I always say, it's a latency preference. You prefer a certain latency. Anything above that you don't like, for the most part. Although, again, there isn't anything under that some people don't like as well. And nobody wants to talk about that. Nobody wants to admit it, but that's how it was. So I'm just going to answer. These are and were recorded with around 13 milliseconds of round trip latency. And that number is very specific because it's what the Psycon manages to get into their drivers reliably and safely. And they write the majority of drivers being used. Avid and RME being the notable exceptions. So some other meathead tries to give me crap about the latency on my vocal monitor. And so he says, I don't play guitar notes fast enough to hear 13 milliseconds as a problem. But if I were trying to sing and hearing my voice instantly through jawbone conduction and 13 milliseconds later in the cans, I would be very unhappy. Now, I like this one specifically because jawbone conduction is one of those absolutely short things. It's like one of the shortest paths back to your perception, right? This is one of those ones where, for the most part, really low latency actually messes you up because it creates a comb filtering effect with just a few samples of latency. It should be enough to make a pretty nasty comb filter. And it's not necessarily going to sound like a phaser because it's not going to be moving much, though there's a situation where it can, but it's going to sound very hollow and weird. And so I say, oh, okay, let me, 1 second, sorry. All right, sorry about that. Okay, so sorry, it's a live thing, and this is why I gotta start having guests again. Then I'll force myself to shut the phone up. Okay, so I'm answering. There are a lot of people very, very sensitive to latency. I don't argue against that. I would, though, like likely millions of recorded singers to this point, give it a try first and see if you're among the 3 to 11% of people that it might bother. There's a lot of data on this topic online. The reason it's so wiggly, 3 to 11%, is that some studies that I've seen, they're more about if people are having a problem because of latency. And a lot of studies are more about, can you perceive latency? And at this high end of around 11%, that seem to be able to perceive latencies around 10 to 12 milliseconds, we don't know how many of them that actually bothers. I do have a at least number of around 3% where it seems like people, around 3% of the people tested are bothered by latency under 13 milliseconds. Now, this is includes everything under 13 milliseconds. So for all I know, that's, there's people on there that are super sensitive to 1 millisecond. I don't know, but or who are bothered by that. But this is at least up to 13 milliseconds. So it'd be nice to really drill down. I'll see if there's maybe we could do a meta-analysis on this channel, huh? But we'll see if we can drill down and make it a little bit more relevant. Okay, so here comes the fallacies, and they're going to start coming hard and heavy here. So the second detractor says, when I said I would like I would, though, like likely millions of recorded singers at this point, give it a try first and see if you're among the 3 to 11% of people that it might bother. Been there, done that, annoying. Okay. That's you. Now, are you going to apply you to everybody else? Because everybody else doesn't agree. This is like the reverse of the bandwagon fallacy, right? I haven't spent much time recording. Okay, so don't tell those of us who have spent our whole lives doing this, accusing us of stupid things. But I can't see why any singer would rather hear a delayed version of what they're singing versus monitoring it in direct in real time. Nobody's saying that they would rather hear a delayed version. Actually, there's times when you would, but that's not what we're saying. We're saying that it's not bothering them. That's a big difference. I know there's lots of folks on here who have lots more recording experience than me. I'm one of them, obviously. Is this actually common? Yes. Vocalists preferring to hear their vocals delayed versus in real time? No. Nobody's claiming that. That's your straw man. And so I said it. That would be a straw man. What the reality is that many aren't as sensitive to latency. If you really have an issue with that, go check out any karaoke club with a minimum 32 milliseconds Bluetooth latency and see if they stop drinking. It's true. How many singers go out there and sing karaoke constantly? And I'm talking, some people aren't able to make this connection. But singers, believe it or not, singers, actual singers, in fact, singers who record albums from time to time, they go to with their friends to karaoke bars and they sing. And they don't die because of the latency. These are regular people. They go out there. There's other places where people are hearing latency and it's not really bothering them that much. So I say, or better yet, realize that the minimum latency possible for all those iOS guitarists, back when you played an iPhone, guitar through an iPhone, and reachable only with an interface that very few have, was a round trip latency of around 22 milliseconds. The funniest thing is to see those same guys on here complaining about the latency of the fractals. So like somebody was complaining about the latency of one of these fractal modeling systems, which had like nothing compared to the latency of these iOS guitar apps. And it was the same guy who used to always talk about just playing amplitude through his phone. So again, second detractor. Now it's starting to get stupid, and now you're starting to see the Dunning-Kruger effects here. He says, "I'm not sure what you mean by what straw man means in this context." Yes, I do. It was a straw man what you said. Nor am I that sure that you get the difference between direct monitoring and monitoring on a signal processing in a DAW. Let me tell that again. Nor am I sure that you get the difference, that I get the difference between direct monitoring and monitoring a signal processed in a DAW. I have no clue what you're talking about with your karaoke reference. When you listen to a song over Bluetooth and sing along to it, there's no latency involved. Yes, there is. There's the latency of that microphone getting to the PA speaker. You hear the music you sing. If the audience is hearing the same signal that you're singing to, they're hearing it at the same time as they hear your voice. It's not exactly it, is it? Now, I've only ever been to a karaoke bar once. I'm too cool for that. So maybe it was different where you hang out. Ha ha ha, you peons. These guys are dumb. The place I worked at, it was Bluetooth into the board, mic into the board to the amp. So, okay, so you weren't using a wireless. So maybe we're speaking different languages, but I don't see why latency in the recording process should ever be an issue or why anyone would want to tolerate it ever. Well, because you're not working in the recording industry. Sorry. Here's something from Mad Max, and this is a parallel path that actually works. It can make a little bit of trouble if you have a long early reflection time or a long pre-delay time, but he says, if I'm recording vocals through my Audient ID14 interface, which obviously has no onboard vocal effects, obviously, I wouldn't know. Sorry. I turn on direct monitoring and turn off the monitoring for the track being recorded. However, I also create a second track which is recording the same input, put a nice reverb on it, and set it in the mix to 100%. And I monitor this track while recording. The benefit of this is that I get the direct monitoring of my dry vocals through the interface and the reverb from the DAW. And it doesn't really matter if there's latency on the reverb, only best of both worlds. Sorry, I don't know if I have a floater or if my glasses got a thingy on them. That's all right. Old people. This is really handy. So you can have that parallel reverb on there and not worrying about the latency. And unless it's a really long pre-delay, like I said, it's probably not going to bug you, but you're going to still have your reverb. So you're not going to be complaining too much. You still got to manage 2 mixes, and you see how he's doing it. But it works. It's not a bad idea. And someone said, did you just solve my year-long problem of YouTube always being too loud for everything in the Helix? Yeah, probably. Okay, so I'm answering the second detractor here, where he says, I'm not sure you understand what straw man means in this context. And I said, from you. You said, is this actually common, vocalists preferring to hear their vocals delayed versus in real time? I said, nobody is saying that. You are arguing with the straw man. So yeah, I understand what straw man mean. And then, the ultimate insult, right? Now I used to be a lot more arrogant about this, but I'm gonna allow myself some arrogant room here. I'm sorry. This is something that I spent a lot of time doing, and I could be wrong, but if I'm going to be wrong, show me where I'm wrong. Don't just insult me. When I'm wrong, I just say, I was wrong. Here we go. Now we're fixing this. So he says, nor am I sure that you get the difference between direct monitoring and monitoring a signal processed in a DAW. So here's my answer. Sorry, guys. Sorry, but it's the truth. Considering I had a big hand in creating one of the DAWs a good chunk of people on here use, in fact, including, I think, both of these guys, and definitely the OP, because we're talking about Reaper. That's me. Considering I had a big hand in creating one of the DAWs a good chunk of the people on here use, as well as significant development time with other major DAWs, and my constant testing and reporting of the very big subject of round-trip latency, and having one of the earliest actual apples-to-apples charts of the issue, I think even before DAW Bench, I could be wrong, but I'd say you were way, way off. And it's true. You go in and insult somebody, you have no idea that they made the DAW you're using. Come on, man. I got to have some poetic justice right there. Says, I have no clue what you're talking about with your karaoke reference and whatever. So I say, the latency in current Bluetooth mics for karaoke is around 30 milliseconds. You do hear that latency. Whether or not you're sensitive to it enough to upset a performance is another thing. One of the craziest phenomenons we're running into lately, and this is for real, this is an important thing to hear. One of the craziest phenomenon we're running into lately as recording engineers are people who grew up with a lot of latency and actually expect it and are freaked out by low latency resonance. And it really is like that converter latency. It's low enough to actually do a little bit of comb filter kind of stuff. It's pretty short. We could go and do some math and show exactly what frequencies would be evolved, but they actually are so used to this like weird delay. It's almost like the where you see the kids singing the auto-tune. They're actually making the sounds of auto-tune with their mouth. And I think that's kind of something that's, it's just what year we live in. So, there's just more ignorance that they're saying. So I finally say, not to be real insulting here, as not everyone has the same job or knowledge base. But really, before you go accusing anyone of not understanding direct monitoring and latency, you need to realize it's a false dichotomy. If you ever used digital for anything, even direct monitoring, and you were okay with it, you were not getting zero latency. You were at the very least getting converter latency, okay? There's no way around it, unless you're really using an all analog path through the whole thing. Your direct monitoring has converter latency, and it is not zero. Okay, so your entire diatribe about zero latency was actually you setting a point of preferred latency, like I said earlier, preferred latency. Definitely a non-zero number. It's not zero latency, it's your preferred latency. Do some cursory Googling and you will see that psychoacoustically, the very lowest non-zero latencies can actually be the most damaging to a performance, as they're short enough to cause comb filtering. And yes, those with decades of recording experience will give you many, many, many reasons why you might want to monitor through the DAW, through the actual mix and through the actual plugins and change you'll be using at mix time during tracking. This can be a real rabbit hole, but there's a recent thread, a measured latency of some ANT modelers, and we were talking about that last week. Let's pull it back up real quick here so we can look at some of these numbers. So the where's the Moors? The Boss GT 1100, they seem to have the lowest, somewhere below, probably below 1 millisecond. The HX Stomp is above 2 milliseconds. The Helix is even slower than that, a little bit more than 2 milliseconds. So we're already talking like DAW round trip latencies, even in the Helix. I mean, if you're really going to run them low, I'm not running my stuff that low, but you're already at that. The Quad Cortex, the one everybody's raving about, it's like 3 milliseconds latency. It's just hilarious how off people are. Okay, anyway. Mind-blowing that the latency purists can be happy with one of these in particular that is slower in real hardware than the comparative chain through an RME interface on a decent computer. And so that's really where we're at to, where the software monitoring is potentially faster than the hardware monitor. That is mind-blowing. On the Helix, I noticed sometimes there's like a 16 sample plug-in delay compensation showing up. So that might be a hard limit anyway. I think there's some certain effects that require the latency or whatever. So we're talking about that reverb parallel path trick, and I said plugins are often made with this philosophy in mind. You might, for instance, have a pre-latent convolution reverb, but if it's in parallel, will often be just fine for tracking unless the intended pre-delay is really long. Yeah, so we're going back and forth with this. The first detractor. It's like, good grief, dude, you're comparing karaoke mics to studio vocal sessions? Talk about a straw man. No straw man. Plenty of singers sing karaoke. You may not like it, you may not believe it, but it's the truth. And it doesn't matter. It's the same phenomenon, and it really isn't bothering a lot of people. It sounds to me like you don't have actually any personal experience recording vocals. I promise you that most people with headphones covering their ears and a mic in front of their face will be able to perceive what happens with sub 13 millisecond latencies in those headphones. Again, though, kind of a straw man, right? But yeah, I don't have any personal experience recording vocals. So I'm going to answer that. And I just say, hey, then you have no idea what's happening in the recording industry right now. And I'm sorry, but it's true. I know that sounds dismissive, but we've already tried the sensible route. Go take a look. Take a look at these papers. People are monitoring through their recording chain. Sorry. That's what they're doing. Go watch any of these YouTube channels. You'll see them doing it. Look at where their direct monitor knob is. So here's the first detractor again. It's not a question of whether you can notice the delay. It's the interaction of the sound you hear transmitted by your own skull, basically instantaneous, much faster than sound in air versus the delayed signal coming in through the phones. It creates this perceivable effect similar to a phase issue. Yes! And it's going to be worse at the lower latencies. They're acting like there's no latency. That's not true. It's just lower latency. So I say, again, false dichotomy. If you are doing digital recording, there is latency. And again, you not understanding the situation, though you implying that I don't. This is all about sensitivity. Your direct monitoring still has latency, quite a lot comparatively. And so he's saying, I'm guessing you're familiar with how it sounds when you create a stereo patch and offset aside by a few milliseconds and listen to headphones, right? You can hear a difference in the stereo field even when one channel is delayed less than that. You create noticeable phasing issues at certain frequencies. Yes, you do. And that's why your lowest latencies are the biggest culprits. And I said this was perfectly covered in the last post with the counterintuitive find that often the lower the latency, the worse the latency-induced problems. So here comes the second detractor, going full Dunning-Kruger mode now. Not even trying to hide the insultingness. Direct monitoring, pure, as I define it, is sound source, guitar or mic wired to an analog board, wired to amp, wired to speakers. I'm betting this was edited. Is this edited? Maybe. I don't know. Direct monitoring, less pure, is, as I define it, is the sound source, guitar wired to digital board mixer such as a Helix with signal routed directly to wired amplifier, wired speaker, whatever. You can define it however you want. Most direct monitoring is going through the converters nowadays. If not all. I'm not sure. It could be all. The 2 to 3 millisecond converter time in the less pure chain is not the same as 13 milliseconds, wherever you got that from. You know where I got that from, you liar. Come on. When I sing using either method in headphones, I can't hear or feel 2 or 3 milliseconds. Again, you. You can't just go from the specific to the general. What's that? The hasty generalization fallacy? You seem to me to be implying, if not right stating, that millions of singers recording in professional studios find the latency experienced when tracking and monitoring concurrently through the DAW to be totally acceptable. Yes. Yes, I do, because that's what they're all doing. I've already admitted that I have little studio experience, so I won't outright call BS on it, but I was not setting up that straw man argument. I was just asking for others who might be following. That's true, so hopefully somebody else said something. But yeah, I take issue with the direct monitoring definition. I say, this is one definition. However, the direct monitoring on most interfaces is actually post-converter latency. And he says the 2 to 3 milliseconds converter time in a less pure chain is not the same as the 13 milliseconds, wherever you got that from. God, that's insulting. So I say, not in the same, in what way? Yes, they're not the same. They're different times. But both are latency. They're both latent signals. So the whole audiophile, Shakti Stone, green paint on the CD, cable lift claims about any latency are just garbage out the window. And it says, when I sing using either method, I can't hear or feel 2 or 3 milliseconds. And I say again, that's you. You, specifically, that's what you feel. You have a latency preference. You do. You don't get to assign that to everybody else. And then the part about you seem to me to be implying that millions of singers recording in professional studios find the latency experience when tracking and monitoring concurrently to the DAW to be totally acceptable. And I'd say, I'm not stating it. The vast majority of recording situations going on in the world right now are stating it. Every single Pro Tools system ever, as far as I know, maybe the software version's different, but the hardware version, for sure, every single Pro Tools session ever also proved it. They're going right through the converters. You're getting converter latency. Don't take this up with me. Take it up with every single peer-reviewed paper on latency and take it up with the laws of physics. It's not no latency. It's all about your preferred latency. Somebody else says, that's only if you're monitoring round trip. I've never opted to do that anyways and always recorded direct and can't imagine why anyone would. That's kind of the textbook argument from personal incredulity, right? So I said, your direct monitoring most likely has latency as well, and that was a textbook fallacious argument from ignorance. Yeah, okay, sorry. So they say, again, much less than 13 milliseconds round trip latency. And I've also found for myself and observed in others that removal of a headphone from one ear totally defeats any monitoring latency issue when tracking vocals. Not speaking from ignorance, so appreciate if moving the goalposts not to attach insults to it as well. Well, sorry, that is an argument for ignorance. So I say, yeah, my beef is with the idea that so many are arguing for zero latency. My claim is that they are arguing for their preferred latency. The unanimous bulk of peer-reviewed literature on the subject backs this up as well. Some people are sensitive at much lower latencies than others. Yeah. None of this changes the fact that nearly 100% of the recordings you have heard made in the last 20 years had latency in the vocal recording chain all the way to the vocalist's ears. Sorry, you guys who have no idea how recording works, you're going to have to go bring some data if you're really going to fight against that one. So someone else is... I say your direct monitoring has latency as well. And this first detractor saying, I'm speaking from my own experience on this. I've recorded hundreds of hours of vocals through my Helix since I bought it. Nice. Now, if you recorded people for a living for a couple decades, you keep claiming that because typical setups have latencies of 13 milliseconds, it means hundreds of thousands of vocal performances were recorded with that way on albums. Why are you disregarding the very likely possibility that the studio mics were set up with either an all-analog feed for the monitor or a hardware direct monitoring setup bypassing the DAW? Where did I do that? It's so trivial to do this even on my own janky home setup that I can't imagine Pro Studios not doing the same. Again, argument from personal incredulity. Just because you don't understand why studios might do something a certain way doesn't mean they don't do them. So let me... So I'm saying when I'm responding to that, I'm speaking from my own experience on this. I've heard hundreds of hours through my Helix since I bought it. And so I say exactly what I said. It's textbook argument from personal incredulity, right? Monitor direct through closed-back headphones to prevent mic bleed. The direct latency is so low that it's no problem for me. It's not perceivable in any way that affects my vocal performances. Again, also exactly what I said. You have a latency preference. It's not a requirement to be zero latency, so latency-based claims are out the window. You have a latency-based preference. When you get down low enough, you're happy. That's the same way so many people are around 13 milliseconds. Sorry, it's the truth. Says, however, running it through software monitoring back out the DAW, round trip of about 10 milliseconds measured via cable loopback is definitely noticeable to me and distracting. Again, you. Also, exactly what I said. You have a latency preference. It is not a requirement to be zero latency, so the zero latency based claims are out the window. You guys can't admit that. So you say you keep claiming that because typical setups have latencies of 13 milliseconds, it means hundreds of thousands of vocals performances are recorded that way on albums. Why are you disregarding the very likely possibility that the studio mics were set up with either an all-analog feed for the monitor or a hardware direct monitoring setup bypassing the DAW? If it's so, I did no such thing. People who are extremely sensitive to latency often do this, and we help them set it up. Okay, here we go again. I personally was very involved in making sure, as much as I possibly could, as near universal implementation of ASIO DM, ASIO Direct Monitoring for the ASIO 2.0. This is kind of a ways back. It could be possible. It was something that was really close to auto input, and I really wanted it to happen. And I pushed hard. Let's just say that. At the time, people were still using consoles as well, so this was really a pretty good substitute for the old days tape recorder's auto input function. So just even that, man, did you even understand what this used to be like in the studios? This is why we do this stuff. This is why we talk about these things. I think people probably rightly fault me for pushing so much development time and money in that direction, given that the industry has, by and large, nearly universally gone to monitoring through the software. But I couldn't see the future, or I'd go for the JREF $1 million fries. Yeah, we've gone through monitoring to the software. Sorry, but we have. So he says, trivial to do this on my own janky home setup that I can't imagine pro studios not doing the same. Again, just because you can't imagine it, you don't do this for a living. So I said, since the well is poisoned against me, likely some other engineer who has recorded bands for a living for a few decades in some of the greatest studios in the world with some of the greatest artists will come to the thread and tell you how most albums are recorded today. I know that's snarky, but it's true. I have the experience. And even if I didn't, you better bring some data if you're going to go against the science. And so he says, let's be clear about what happened here. The OP started a thread looking for help. The problem they described was exactly the kind of thing that can be caused by latency in the vocal monitor. Some of us tried to help and gave good advice. You then, for some reason I still don't understand, decided to turn this into another there's always latency and none of you know what you're talking about philosophical debate. No. You showed that you don't know what you're talking about. That's not on me. And then when I stated my own, okay, here we go. And then when I stated my own experience as evidence backing up what I suggested as you help, you hand wave it away as some fallacy because it's a fallacy. You can't use non sequiturs. They don't help. You don't get anywhere with that. If the argument you're making not only doesn't get you closer to finding the actual answer you're looking for, but actually muddies the water and makes it harder for you to see the truth, you get rid of it. That's why we get rid of those fallacies. And so I said, yes, I did help. It could be easily argued that you guys are the ones who derailed it, which they were. And yes, fallacies add nothing to the conversation and actually hurt understanding, so they can and should be hand waved away with extreme haste. I don't know if they kept going, but I can keep giving forever. Let's see. Okay, so I think probably beating a latency purist horse to death enough for this time, and I've probably tortured you for an hour already. Jeez, but man, I'm just getting started today. This is just one of those days. So if we look at the subject of this thing, is the FRFR really the goal? Let's get into that. This is kind of interesting thing. You may or may not care much about this, but we're gonna check this out. So let's see. So I started this thread over at the gear page. I said, as more and more videos are popping up, and as mentioned in this forum, some people are, or always have, let's be honest, are moving to regular old guitar cabinets instead of FRFR for the guitar amp modeler systems. If you don't know what this is, and sorry guys that for the last, what is it, 6 months just about, I've really talked a lot about guitar stuff. And, you know, I spent my life, even though I'm a guitar player, my studio time was never really that, you know. Nowadays I kind of do. And I'm interested in this technology. So, but what's going on here is that these digital modeling amps, as we were talking about earlier, they have they can create a full range of sounds, you know, keyboard sounds, all kinds of stuff. And so one of the things that they model is the sound of different speakers, especially the sound of different speakers being mic'd up. And in order to really do that convincingly, you need a flat speaker like a studio monitor. But in theory, like a PA monitor, right? Or a PA speaker. And that's why we watched a video a couple weeks ago on, you know, FRFR speakers or just PA speakers. They pretty much are. We talk a lot about reactance and how speakers act, how they might sag, how they interact with the guitar amp itself. And I'm not always all that sure that matters that much, but it could. So one of the things is some of the FRFR makers were making 12-inch speakers. They're like, well, at least it's like a guitar speaker. And we talked about that last week, I think, with the Celestians, with their concentric driver speaker with the tweeter inside the woofer, and how it's like the guitar, full range guitar response speaker or whatever. But if you really think about it, aside from modeling different speaker cabinets, and aside from having a flat response so you can have super bright cleans and acoustic sounds and, you know, things like I actually like, most people are really just trying to use this thing as an amplifier. And back in the old days when you had your full-on amp, you couldn't switch speaker sounds. You know, your speaker was in your cabinet, and that's the sound you got. That's the amplifier. That's the cabinet sound you got. Period. That's the speaker sound you got. So it seems like people are starting to use, and they have for a long time though, but in kind of a reverse move. There is kind of a movement of using regular guitar amps and regular guitar amp cabinets, just a regular 12-inch speaker, not no tweeter. So this isn't a full range speaker. You'd have to get rid of your speaker emulator, at least in the path that's going to the guitar amp. But it makes sense because, you know, let's say your modeler died, you still have a perfectly good guitar amp you can play through on stage. Might not have all your effects and all your switches, but at least it's working and you got an amp. Makes sense. I gave it a try through a couple amps over here, and I didn't like the sound of it. It just sounded like a wet blanket. I mean, of course, I know the cleans are going to sound different because they're not going to have that tweeter that I really use for that. But even the amps themselves, it still sounded like there's a speaker simulator on it, honestly, but like a gross one, like I had two of them in a row, whereas the I don't know, the FRFR just sounds so much better. But I said one of the ergonomically convenient things are the FRFRs usually bring in is an all-in-one integrated amplifier and DSP, often with the limiter there for safety. Like, you know, the amplifier is built into the PA speaker. Like I said, these are basically PA speakers for the most part. And I said, no need for a speaker cable or a box that can fall off while playing. With all these pedal board amps coming out, has anyone internally mounted or maybe Velcroed one inside a 4x12? So I'm thinking, you know, just take one of these power amps, especially these modern small ones that are like pedal size, stick it inside or you know, securely on a 4x12 speaker, and just plug into that, and that's your guitar modeler. And I mean, you could do this with the 1x12 as well, but you know, I've actually got some 412 cabinets sitting over here. You could try it. And it says, sure, you can do that, no problem. Dual lock works fine. I've had a 44 Magnum mounted in a 1x12 with no issues. Somebody else did a Matrix GM50 and one of his 1x12s. Cab has 2 speaker jacks, gives you the option to run 2 cabs for larger venues. Works fantastic. Instead of cutting the back of the cab, I replaced it with a piece of plywood and painted it flat black. Nice. Actually looks good. Unfortunately, I discontinued the GM50. And I showed, there's something called the Newt, Ashdown, the Newt pedalboard guitar amp, like 200 watts or something. Let's see. Somebody answered, one good thing about modern digital amps is they usually do not generate a lot of excess heat, so you often do not have to go crazy with heat management if you mount in a cab. The Kemper powered cab has a 200 watt or so ice power amp in it with integrated power supply. Now, people like that thing. Isn't that a Class D amp? And there isn't a vent or port on the cab at all. I think a 4x12 would have plenty of air in it to handle the heat from a digital amp, meaning Class D or so. Another thing that would help is to make sure you rewire the 412 speakers to as low an impedance as you can and select your internal amp to match that. If you have a standard 16 ohm 4x12 with the 416 ohm speakers, series parallel speaker wiring, rewiring all the speakers in parallel would make the entire cab 4 ohms, and that is an optimum efficiency for impedance for a huge number of digital amps appropriate for internal mounting in a cab. A 200 watt at 4 ohms digital amp would be much smaller and much less expensive than an amp that would put out 200 watts into 16 ohms. That same amp would be rated at 800 watts into 8 ohms. Yeah, I always get trouble with the power management on these things. I'd like to actually ask, I'll be asking MKB for a recommendation of some of these amps. So if I have an 8 ohm cabinet with 4 8 ohm speakers, do I parallel them all and get 2 ohms? Am I going to blow something up? I don't know. What does that do to the sound? Like, I'm sure that the tone purists will kill me for using the Class D amp or whatever. But, I wonder, because I saw, see, here's this one. Katana Mark II has an FRFR for the Axe 3. He says, I know Leon did a video on this. I'm going to rewatch it, but I'm wondering if any of you folks have any experience with using one of the new Mark II Katanas as an FRFR solution. Katana is a Boss amp. As far as I know, it doesn't have a tweeter. It's not actually FRFR. It's a modeling amp. It's got a lot of effects, and it's $100 cheaper than the similar Catalyst, as far as I know. Somebody says it won't be FRFR as the Katana uses a standard guitar speaker, but it will work as a power amp and speaker for the XFX. Whether it's the sound you want will depend on your taste. Might as well try it before you spend money on anything else. Another guy says, I have a Katana Mark 100 that I use with my XFX3 by disabling cabinet simulation, of course. On the XFX3, instead of the XFX3 output to the Katana effects return input. It definitely isn't FRFR, but I do like the tone I get out of it. Somebody else says it was terrible. Yeah, cab modeling. And then I looked at the Catalyst, which is Line 6's competitor to the Boss Katana. Actually, as far as I can tell, the Katana is better. It's got more stuff, more sounds, more presets you can switch between. I think with the Catalyst, there's only 2 sounds. But again, it doesn't have a tweeter. Let me just look at what we got here. Catalyst versus DT25 versus FRFR. He says, hi, I've been using my Helix into effects loop return on my Evolution Amber 40C. I don't know what that is. Looking for FRFR for guitar modelers. Celestion F12 X200 sounds killer. Considering purchasing a Catalyst or a DT25, I'm going to be recording live with the video producer. Want to have traditional amps and mics in studio. Well, you can't really make it that way. DT25. Okay, here we go. So this guy says, I've done all 3. Helix to DT25, Helix to FRFR, Helix to Catalyst. And of course, this is all subjective, right? The DT25 is dead product, but it was pretty cool. Let's see. So he says, FRFR, I use a QSC CP12 with a 12-inch speaker. In short, it's amazing. Using stock amps and cabs, I get all the tones I want and have much easier time matching versus the DT25. Yes, I can literally watch a rig rundown on YouTube, set up the same blocks on the Helix, and have the tone 85% there. That takes some practice as well. I'm getting better at it. Once you get used to the Helix and really start to understand how it works, a lot of this tube amp versus modeler stuff disappears. Nice. So much of it is user error, and as people say, the instant you're in a band makes no one could tell the difference anyway. I like this guy. This guy is practical. Catalyst. Lots of good things to say here. First, the Catalyst by itself really is an amazing amp. The built-in amps and effects sounded terrific on their own. So if you want just an amp and don't want to lug a lot of equipment, you got that. The power amp in works as advertised. It's an uncolored input for the Helix or whatever monitor you want. That said, you're back to a cabinet again, so you'll always have that color in your tones. However, you don't have the zillion variables that the DT25 has, so OCD people will have an easier time with the Catalyst. I like that. Getting rid of all these, like, which speaker IR am I going to use? You get rid of that with this setup. You only got the one speaker. You're always going to have that sound. And like I said, my biggest problem with this is what it does to the acoustic tone. I don't know that I really care that much what the speaker sounds like. I know that sounds terrible. In a couple minutes here, when this is over, I'm going to go grab a Fender Champ with a 212 open back, and I'm going to plug my Helix into it and see what it sounds like. We're gonna see how that is. Says you get what you get. With my Helix, it sounded great. I just prefer the absolute simplicity of the CP12. Of course, the Catalyst is a current product from line 6, so there should be firmware updates. So it's tempting. But I was looking at these different things at Anderton's. There's a Hotone or Hot One, whatever, Loudster portable clean power amp, 115 euros, 75 watts output. Who knows how loud that 75 watts is compared to, and I hate to say real tube amp, but for the most part, when a tube amp said 50 watts and it had two 6550s or whatever in it, it's loud. It's really loud. And some of these 1,000-watt amps are nowhere near that loud. So, I'm always kind of sketched out about this. Man, $800 for some of these. Didn't Joyo have something like a Joyo amps? Let's see. I still have their battery thing. I think it's great. Look at how cheap these things. Hold on. Let's see what these guys. See a bunch of guitar at Amazon. I want to see where do they sell these things? Let's see what the prices are. Joyo. I'll just go to their place. Amps. Extra guitar amps. I don't know. What's a DC series digital amp? Okay. Not something I'm interested in. Okay. So really, I don't need any sounds. What's the difference here? Look at all these things. Jeez, they make a ton of these things. Let's see what the I think the Zombies one people were talking about. Let's just see what this is. Wow, they have so many. Why would they have so many different ones? What's the Bluetooth for? Is there 18-volt input? How loud can this thing be? Let's see. This may not. Where in the world are the specs? Okay. Oh, 20 watts. Okay, well, this ain't anything. Do they make anything loud? Is this the same thing? Jackman parameters, 20 watts. Yeah, I guess these are all tiny. I know somebody was making little miniature heads that were really loud, weren't they? All right, well, I think that's all there is today. If you got an idea for some sort of plate amp or something that's going to be comparable in volume to like a 100-watt Marshall, if I stick it in a 4x12, let me know. I'd really like to know about this. But we'll